Master Chief versus Captain America, Goku versus Superman, and last but certainly not least, Vandal versus Phantom. For most of these, we'll never find any answers, but for Vandal versus Phantom, Riot has released information behind the scenes about which weapon is actually superior, so we can finally answer the question, what is the best rifle in Valorant? But regardless of the weapon, you need insane aim and movement in order to get the highest impact, and for that, there's SkillCapped. From in-depth guides breaking down different movement fundamentals, warm-up routines, aim training, and more that is going to get your aim from 0 to hero as quickly as possible. And in addition, we have our ever-popular Discord coaching that is going to improve your understanding of the game to everything you need in order to climb to Immortal and beyond as fast as possible. So check SkillCapped out right now in the links down below. Now, the developers themselves have released an article titled Phantom versus Vandal, where they break down many of the interesting stats around kill distribution, what is the most effective rifle at different ranges, and which weapon ultimately is the best. So let's start from the top. The first category is wins for the Phantom, and they said this, quote, "If you find yourself taking a close to medium range gunfight, the Phantom might be your friend." If we look at this kill distribution curve, in that 15 to 20 meters is when things become about even, but before that, the Phantom actually has quite a big percentage of winning those close range fights. At the closest ranges, it's about the same, but especially from that 5 to 10 meters and that 10 to 15 meters, the Phantom has a pretty sizable advantage, and you can argue that a lot of engagements happen within that sweet spot, especially if you play for it on purpose. Now, the developers say this in quote, "We see the total number of each weapon's kills broken out by distance in 5-meter increments. Each point on each line represents a discrete distance bucket and its correlating percentage of kills. From this, we saw that the majority of Phantom kills occurred within a range of 15 meters, while the Phantom's kills have a more consistent arch across all ranges. For reference, 15 meters is about the distance when peeking the corner from the end of the attacker side hallway on ascent B to the defender's main entrance." Now, this next graph is a little confusing because they actually mislabeled it. The red is the Phantom and the white is actually the Vandal. And you can really see that huge drop off from that 0 to 15 to that 15 to 20 with the Phantom. And you don't really see that drop off with the Vandal, although that 0 to 15 is so much higher with the Phantom. Although with the Vandal, from that 30 plus meters, the Vandal has a much bigger chunk of percentage, about 5% better when you get to those max ranges. Now, to explain why the Phantom has such a huge advantage in the close range, they titled the next section Spray and Pray, and they said this: "A weapon spray pattern in a tactical shooter is a complex discussion. First shot accuracy, second shot accuracy, bullet spread, recoil recovery, number of rounds fired, number of hits, all play a part in tracking how efficiently a weapon can get kills while spraying down the enemy. To simplify this, the Insights team was able to calculate for a weapon spray control using time as a factor. Multi-kills within 5 seconds act as a good, real-world proxy for spray control, especially in 3K and 4K situations where aiming, firing, pausing, and resetting your crosshair for each kill would be rough in that time window." So in the first graph, they break it down by rank and multi-kills, and in the second graph, they break it down by distance and weapon with multi-kills. And they said this: "In the graphs above, we see how many multi-kills the Phantom and Vandal were able to rack up within a 5-second time window. And once again, the Phantom reigns supreme in multi-kill situations within 15 meters. This further proves Phantom spray control dominance, as spraying tends to only be effective at short range. We also see that the Phantom performs better in 5-second multi-kill scenarios across all ranks, so whether you're hard stuck iron or trying out for VCT, the Phantom seems to be your best choice in close range spray scenarios." Now, we do know that the Phantom thrives in short range, so what about long range? And let's compare that. So the Phantom versus Vandal duels, the lethal engagement by rank and by distance is the next graph that we can look at. Now, looking at it, the Phantom actually only has an advantage in that 0 to 15 meters, and it's by about 3%. But once we get to that 15 to 30 meters at every rank, it changes to about a 4 to 5% differential in the Vandal's favor. And then at 30 plus meters, the Vandal has a huge huge advantage, nearly 10%, sometimes over 10% of an advantage, and that's regardless of whether or not you're golden below or immortal and above. Now this moves on to wins for the Vandal, and they said this: we wanted to see which rifle players favored and by how much. We had a small hunch that the Vandal would come out on top for this one, and sure enough, it did. For the purposes of this study, we measured players' primary loadouts. We defined primary loadouts as the weapons that players purchased in all rounds excluding pistol rounds, eco, bonus, and OT rounds. We found that players in competitive queue choose the Vandal more than any other weapon in the game as their primary loadout. And now we can see that people pick the Vandal about 3-to-1 compared to the Phantom, and that's true in competitive and pro play. So why exactly is that Vandal such a fan favorite? The next section is clicking heads, and they say everyone knows that there are different ways to get a kill, but more often than not, a headshot will likely make the difference between a kill and an assist. One of the biggest complaints about the Phantom is non-lethal headshots, and this actually happens a decent percentage of the time. From that 15 to 30 meters, 23.4% of the time, there are non-lethal headshots. And from that 30 plus meters, a 33.10% of the time, there are non-lethal headshots from that range. And for the Vandal, the number of times a headshot doesn't kill a target remains consistently 0. This is because the Vandal headshot does 160 damage at any range without penetration, but for the Phantom, the percentage of headshots that don't kill their target rises dramatically at range. Another way to think about this is it's the what if scenario. So if the team looked at these kind of engagements specifically, what happens after a Phantom player does 140 headshot damage to a Vandal player? The Vandal wins 11.63% of the time. A third party or unresolved 10.36% of the time, and then 78% of the time the Phantom wins. That means that over 20% of the time, you don't just automatically win when you hit a headshot like you do with the Vandal, which is definitely one of the primary reasons why the Vandal is just more popular. They specifically reference the idea that players ask themselves, what if I bought a Vandal, when they lose a situation where they did 140, and this drives that what if situation that forces people or encourages them to buy that Vandal instead of that Phantom. Now moving on to Deadeye, and if the Vandal is getting more headshot kills, is it a more accurate weapon or does it just do more damage? Now these next graphs show the overall damage breakdown of each weapon by region, ADS, and armor pen. We see that the Phantom actually lands more shots to the body and legs than its rival rifle, but the Vandal takes a little more off the top with a higher percentage of headshots. This could be because the Phantom's higher rate of fire and the potential of a non-lethal first headshot, so players tend to have a wider window to hit more body and leg shots, while the Vandal only needs one headshot to end the duel with a guaranteed kill. It's safe to assume that Phantom players probably go for a little more than a one tap at most distances, even in ADS, which is likely why the amount of damage during ADS is higher on the Phantom. Next off, they do talk about armor piercing rounds. How does armor factor into each rifle's lethality? And we can look at the lethality with light armor and with heavy armor. And for a good indicator on real-world performance against armor-wearing opponents, the team compared the KD, kills death ratio, for each weapon when against an enemy wearing equal armor. And to continue the quote, they give examples: light armor Phantom user versus light armor enemy, or heavy armor Vandal user versus heavy armor enemy, etc. They found that the Phantom performs almost equally as well as the Vandal against light armored opponents, but falls to heavily armored enemies more often than Vandal users. This makes perfect sense when considering the previous damage region percentage graphs. The Phantom typically lands more body shots and non-lethal headshots, which isn't the greatest of situations against an enemy in heavy armor, so buy your armor, folks. Now, this all kind of summarizes in the verdict, and they give us a lukewarm take here, but I'll give you a stronger one afterwards. They say it's all subjective. If you're consistently clicking heads, the Vandal might be right for you. If you're a little more spray and pray, try the Phantom. Also, what kind of gunfights do you take? Are you nearby angle holder and or smoke spammer? Go Phantom. Or do you like to pinpoint your shots from longer distance? If so, go Vandal. We asked Karsten Dohan, one of our Insight team researchers, for his final word on the topic, and here's what he had to say. It really boils down to your playstyle and confidence as a player. When in the heat of the moment, using a Phantom, the average Valorant player doesn't think to themselves, as long as they're less than X meters away, I have a slight advantage statistically. Both the Phantom and Vandal are reliable reliable in most situations. As long as you understand how to play to different strengths of each rifle, you'll be fine. Besides, I think game sense determines a win more than raw accuracy, but that's something that's really difficult to measure. Now, the true answer is it's dependent on your skin. Like, if you don't have a good skin, okay, yeah, all joking aside, both guns have their strengths and weaknesses. This means that you can play to that strength, and on certain parts of certain maps, one gun's gonna be better than the other. With certain characters, one gun is gonna be better than the other. So just apply the strengths and weaknesses of the gun of your choice to the characters you're playing on the maps you're playing on, and that will help you decide how you should play and which weapon you should pick. But for everything else, there's SkillCapped with tips, tricks, guides, and everything you could possibly need to improve your aim as quickly as possible. We have in-depth movement mechanic guides, warm-up drills, and more. So what are you waiting for? Check out SkillCapped right now in the links down below.